Did you know that French fries aren't from France? Yeah, they're cooked in Greece. Why did Achilles go shoe shopping? Because heels are his only weakness. Okay. Chapter 13, study guide questions, or vocab. Sorry, not questions. Questions are later. Number 1, Homer. Homer was an ancient Greek poet. He was believed to be blind. He's the composer of the Odyssey and the Iliad. Why do I say composer instead of writer? Well, because depending on when Homer actually lived, Greece might not have had a writing system at that time. What we do know for sure is that Homer's poems, for much of their history, were passed down through oral tradition. They weren't written down until significantly later in Greece's history. All right, number 2, Aesop, or Aesop, depending on how you want to pronounce it. He was a Greek slave who wrote fables that were very popular. Right? And today we call them Aesop's fables. Number 3, Minoans. So the Minoans were the first European civilization. So let's see. Let me go all the way back to the beginning of chapter 13. Yes, so the Minoans were the first European civilization. They appeared on the island of Crete. They're known for their king, King Minos, who is a part of Greek mythology because of the story of King Minos and the Minotaur. So the Minoans were not actually Greek, but they're closely associated with Greece's history. And one other thing you need to know about the Minoans. Their civilization was destroyed. We're not sure how. Probably a natural disaster like a volcano or an earthquake or something like that. All right, next. Helots or Helots. These come from the book's discussion of Sparta. Hold on a second. So a helot or helot, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, are people that the Spartans conquered and then enslaved. So if you were conquered by a Spartan and they didn't kill you, you became a helot, a slave that is conquered. Remember, the helots often revolted against Spartan control. Right? Helots did not like being enslaved by the Spartans, and so there are a lot of revolts against the Spartans. Okay, tenant farmer. A tenant farmer is a farmer in ancient Greece who do not own the land that they farm. Right? So they're farmers who pay rent in order to use another person's land to farm. Polis. Polis is a word we use to describe a Greek city-state. It's where we get our English words like police and politics. So yeah. It's a Greek word that means city-state. Okay, peninsula. A peninsula is a landmass surrounded by water on 3 sides. Why is this in the chapter? Because Greece is a peninsula in the Mediterranean Sea. Greece also has a lot of peninsulas that stick out of it, right? The most important peninsula that sticks out of Greece is the Peloponnesian Peninsula. This is where we see the city-states of Sparta, Corinth, Argos, right? Those are part of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Xenophon. Xenophon was a Greek philosopher who had a lot of ideas about the Greek family, right? So he believed that men should be outdoors as much as possible, women should be indoors as much as possible. Okay, Odyssey. Odyssey is the epic poem composed by Homer. It's like the sequel to the Iliad. It tells a story of one of the characters of the Iliad, Odysseus, aka Ulysses, and his extremely difficult journey to get home. Another thing you need to know about the Odyssey is, like the Iliad, it contains a lot of characters who exhibit things that the ancient Greeks would have admired. Right? So Odysseus is very clever and heroic. His wife, Penelope, for example, in many ways represents the ideal Greek woman because she stays loyal to him for 20 years. She doesn't even know if he's alive, right? And she maintains his house. She raises his son. She entertains guests, right? She does everything that a Greek woman is supposed to do. Aegean Sea. The Aegean Sea is the sea that is on the east coast of, or borders the east coast of the Greek peninsula. So you have Greece, and then you have the Aegean Sea on the east, and then you have the Ionian Peninsula on the other side of the Aegean Sea. So the Aegean Sea is where a lot of Greek islands and colonies were located. Mediterranean Sea. So the Mediterranean Sea is the large sea, and it contains the Aegean Sea, right? So the Mediterranean Sea is that huge body of water that encompasses the entire Mediterranean world. So not just Greece, but also Italy, North Africa, other parts of Europe, right, border the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea also contains the Aegean Sea, the Ionian Peninsula, etc., etc. All right. Oh, and the Ionian Sea, yeah. Okay. Sparta. Sparta is a Greek city-state that used conquest to deal with its problem of overpopulation. Right? So Sparta had a military-based culture because they needed a powerful army in order to obtain resources that they needed to feed their population. We're going to learn a lot more about Sparta in chapter 14, by the way. Aristocracy. So aristocracy is a term to describe a social class, right? It's not particular to Greece alone. The aristocrats were wealthy landowners in ancient Greece, right? So they're the highest ranking class in ancient Greece. So they're the people that own the most amount of land. They're Greek citizens who own land, and they're not farmers. They're the ones who get to participate the most in Greek political life and in Greek culture. Okay, next one, estate. So an estate is a fancy word that means land that people own. So the aristocrats own very large estates compared to everyone else. Small farmers had very small estates compared to everyone else. So an estate is basically your land and everything you build on top of your land. Right? So this would be your house. If you have like a barn or something like that. That would be part of your estate. Your estate would also include livestock if you have any on your land. So it's your land and all the property on your land. Acropolis. So the Acropolis was a part of the Greek city-state that was built on top of a hill. This is like the most valuable or important part of the Greek city-state. It's where you have the most important buildings. So these would be temples and important public buildings. Why is it built on top of a hill? Well, because if there were invaders, you would want the things you care about most to be at the top of the hill because it's a lot easier to defend, right? Invading forces would have to fight uphill in order to reach the Acropolis, and defending forces get to fight downhill, which is a big advantage when gravity is on your side. Right, so Acropolis is the upper part of the city. It's also where a lot of politics happened. Right, so if there was like a big vote that was going to happen in a Greek city-state, it would probably happen in the Acropolis. All right, next one. Mycenaeans. So the Mycenaeans were a civilization in ancient Greece, developed about near 1600 BC. The Mycenaeans were before the city-states. So Greece's history, remember, at first they had kingdoms, and one of the most famous kingdoms in ancient Greece was the Mycenaean kingdom. It was led by, one of their kings was a guy named Agamemnon. The Mycenaeans were also involved in the Trojan War. And you know that whole story. They were, let's see, they were conquered by the Dorians. They relied mostly on trade to support their economy. I guess that's all you need to know about the Mycenaeans. All right, annex. So I'm trying to remember which definition I used for annex. Hold on, give me a second. Let me look. Okay, yeah, the verb, annex. All right, so annex means attaching something that you conquer to yourself. Right? So at least that's what it means in the context of what Sparta did. So Sparta was known for using conquest in order to annex its neighbors to itself. Right? So the Spartans would invade a small kingdom, maybe. They would kill a lot of the enemy soldiers, take captives, take prisoners. Those prisoners, those captives would become helots or helots. And the land and the property and the resources of that kingdom they've conquered, they would annex to themselves. That means they would take it over and it would now belong to Sparta. All right, Iliad. The Iliad is an epic Greek poem composed by Homer. It tells the story of the events leading up to the Trojan War, and then the Trojan War, and how the Trojan War ended. So the story of the Trojan horse, that is part of the Iliad. All right, Athens. Athens is a Greek city-state that it's probably the most well-known Greek city-state because it's sort of like the center of Greek culture and philosophy and art and entertainment and politics. Right? A lot of things that Greece developed first happened in the city-state of Athens. So Athens relied on trade and commerce, primarily to deal with its problem of overpopulation. And we'll read a lot more about Athens in chapter 14. Last word, gymnasia. This is a fancy word to describe a Greek school. Right? And remember, schools in ancient Greece were for boys only. Sorry, ladies, or sorry, boys, depending on how you feel about school. right? The reason it's called a gymnasia is because it's more than just like a class where you sit down and you read and you write. Gymnasia were outdoors, and they involved a lot of reading and writing and math and philosophy and that kind of training, but it also involved physical training as well, right? So a Spartan gymnasia would be a school where not only do you learn reading and writing, but you also learn how to use certain weapons. Okay, that's it for our study guide vocab. Let's see. How do I stop this? Oh, here we go.